The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Dry Creek, turning the air into a shimmering curtain of heat that made breathing feel like swallowing sand. It was the summer of 1877, and the small frontier town sat like a weathered bone bleaching under the relentless sky. Tumbleweeds rolled past the saloon's swinging doors, while horses stood with lowered heads at the hitching posts, their tails swishing lazily at the persistent flies. Maybelle Quinn pressed her face against the cracked windowpane of her family's ramshackle cabin, watching dust devils dance across the barren landscape. At 18, she possessed the kind of beauty that seemed almost defiant in such harsh surroundings, honey-colored hair that caught the light like spun gold, eyes the color of prairie sage, and a stubborn set to her jaw that warned she wouldn't bend easily to any man's will. "Maybelle, get yourself presentable, girl." Her father's slurred voice crashed through her reverie like a stone through glass. Samuel Quinn stumbled into the room, reeking of cheap whiskey and desperation. His bloodshot eyes struggled to focus on his eldest daughter. "What for, Pa?" Maybelle turned from the window, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. She'd seen that particular gleam in his eyes before, the same look he got when he was about to trade away something precious for another bottle. "We got company coming. Important company." Samuel wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a grimy streak across his stubbled cheek. "Warren Dittmer's riding out here." The name sent a chill down Maybelle's spine despite the oppressive heat. Warren Dittmer owned the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties, a man whose word was law in Dry Creek. Folks said he was fair but hard as iron, a widower who'd buried his young wife 15 years back and never looked at another woman since. He had to be pushing past 45 by now, older than her own father. "What's Mr. Dittmer want with us?" But even as she asked, a terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. Samuel wouldn't meet her eyes. "Now don't go getting all high and mighty on me, Ud girl. This here's a good opportunity for the family. For all of us." "Pa, no." The words came out as barely a whisper. "I owe him, Maybelle, more than I can ever pay back, but he's willing to forgive the debt, every last cent, in exchange for—" He gestured vaguely in her direction. "In exchange for me?" The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "You're selling me like I'm livestock." "It ain't like that." Samuel's face flushed red, though whether from shame or anger, she couldn't tell. "You'll be married proper, in the church and everything. You'll want for nothing as Mrs. Dittmer. Fine dresses, good food, a big house. A prison is still a prison, even if it's got fancy curtains." Maybelle's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You watch your tongue. Girl, your sisters are counting on you. Little Elizabeth and Sarah need food in their bellies and clothes on their backs. Would you deny them that for your stubborn pride?" The mention of her younger sisters, Elizabeth, barely 14, and Sarah, only 10, was a calculated blow. Maybelle's shoulders sagged as she thought of their pinched faces and patched dresses. How many nights had they gone to bed hungry because Pa drank away the grocery money? A cloud of dust on the horizon announced Dittmer's arrival long before the man himself appeared. Maybelle watched from the doorway as he dismounted from a magnificent black stallion, moving with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. He was tall and lean, weathered by sun and wind, with steel-gray hair and eyes like chips of flint, not handsome in the conventional sense. But there was something compelling about the way he carried himself, a quiet authority that commanded attention without demanding it. "Samuel," he nodded curtly to her father. Then his gaze found Maybelle. "Miss Quinn." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with all the defiance she could muster. "Mr. Dittmer, might we speak inside?" His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting orders across vast distances. The cabin's interior had never seemed shabbier than it did with Warren Dittmer standing in it. He had to duck his head to clear the low door frame, and his presence seemed to fill the cramped space. Maybelle noticed how his eyes took in every detail: the patched furniture, the empty pantry shelves visible through the kitchen doorway, her sisters peeking around the corner with wide, curious eyes. "Girls, go outside and tend to the chickens," Maybelle ordered gently. Elizabeth started to protest, but Sarah tugged her away. "Your father tells me you're agreeable to the arrangement," Dittmer said once they were alone. "My father tells lies when he's drunk, which is most of the time." Maybelle's voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. Samuel started forward with a raised hand, but Dittmer's sharp gesture stopped him cold. "The lady's speaking truth, far as I can see. Question is, what do we do about it?" "The debt stands at $800, Samuel whined. "You said—" "I know what I said." Dittmer never took his eyes off Maybelle. "But I'm not in the business of taking unwilling brides. Bad for everyone involved." For a moment, hope flared in Maybelle's chest. Perhaps he would leave. Find some other arrangement. "However," he continued, "I'm also not in the business of forgiving debts out of the goodness of my heart. Your father owes me, Miss Quinn. If not paid in cash, then it must be paid in kind. You can come willingly as my wife, or I can take this land, this cabin, and everything in it as partial payment. Your family will be on the street by sunset." The hope died as quickly as it had been born. Maybelle thought of Elizabeth and Sarah, of her sickly mother lying in the back room, too weak to rise. Out on the street, they wouldn't last a week. "You're no better than him," she said quietly, nodding toward her father. "Using my family's desperation to force my hand." Something flickered in Dittmer's eyes. Regret. Understanding it was gone too quickly to tell. "The world's not a kind place. Miss Quinn, we all do what we must to survive." "When?" The word came out strangled. "Saturday, 3 days hence. The Reverend will perform the ceremony at noon." 3 days. Maybelle felt the walls closing in, her future shrinking down to this single, unavoidable point. "And if I run, then I collect on the debt immediately." His tone was matter-of-fact, not cruel but implacable. "Your family loses everything." After Dittmer left, Maybelle sat in the gathering dusk, her mind racing. She could feel the trap closing around her, built from her father's weakness and Dittmer's wealth, mortared with her own love for her sisters. The unfairness of it all burned like acid in her throat. "Maybelle!" Elizabeth's small voice came from the doorway. "Are you really going to marry that old man?" "He's not that old," Maybelle said automatically, then wondered why she was defending him. "And yes, it seems I am." "But you don't love him." "No." Maybelle pulled her sister close. "But sometimes we do things we don't want to do to protect the people we do love. You understand?" Elizabeth nodded solemnly, looking far too wise for her years. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Women from town arrived with a wedding dress. Dittmer's doing. No doubt, it was simple but well made. White cotton with tiny pearl buttons down the back. Maybelle stood still as stone while they fitted it, feeling like she was being measured for her shroud. Saturday dawned bright and merciless. The small church was packed, everyone in town eager to witness the spectacle of Samuel Quinn's beautiful daughter marrying the richest man in the county. Maybelle stood at the altar in her borrowed dress, her hands clutching a bouquet of wildflowers Elizabeth had picked that morning. Dittmer waited at the altar, dressed in a black suit that made him look even more imposing. The Reverend droned on about the sanctity of marriage, about duty and obligation. Maybelle barely heard him over the roaring in her ears. "Do you, Maybelle Quinn, take this man?" "Wait!" The word erupted from her before she could stop it. The church fell silent, everyone leaning forward in anticipation. Maybelle turned to face the congregation, her eyes blazing. She spotted the knife on the altar, used for cutting the communion bread. In one swift motion, she grabbed it and drove it point first into the wooden pulpit. "I ain't no horse to be traded for debts," her voice rang out clear and strong. I ain't property to be bought and sold. I stand here not because I choose to, but because I must. Let every soul in this church know that." Gasps echoed through the building. The Reverend looked like he might faint. Samuel started forward, his face purple with rage. But again Dittmer stopped him with a gesture. "Let her speak," he said quietly. Maybelle yanked the knife free and set it back on the altar with trembling hands. "I'll go through with this because I have to, but I won't pretend to be happy about it. I won't simper and smile and act grateful for being sold like cattle." She turned back to Dittmer, expecting anger, perhaps even violence. Instead, she found something else in his eyes. Was it respect, understanding? "Now you can finish your ceremony," she told the Reverend, who was still frozen in shock. The rest of the wedding proceeded in stunned silence. When Dittmer placed the simple gold band on her finger, his touch was surprisingly gentle. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Dittmer leaned in for the customary kiss but stopped inches from her face. "That's something you'll give freely or not at all," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Maybelle caught sight of her reflection in a window. The girl staring back at her looked fierce and unbroken, despite the ring on her finger. She might be married, but she wasn't conquered. Not yet. The wedding feast was held at Dittmer's ranch, a sprawling affair that made her father's cabin look like a chicken coop. But Maybelle took no joy in the fine food or elegant surroundings. This was just a prettier cage. As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Maybelle stood on the porch of her new home. She was no longer Maybelle Quinn. She was Mrs. Warren Dittmer now, whether she liked it or not. But as she watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, she made herself a promise. She might be forced to live in this man's house, to bear his name, but she would never give him her spirit. That, at least, would always remain her own. The battle for her freedom had only just begun. The heavy oak door of the master bedroom closed with a finality that made Maybelle's heart pound. She stood in the middle of the vast room, still in her wedding dress, feeling like a sparrow trapped in a gilded cage. The furnishings were rich but austere dark wood, deep burgundy curtains, and a bed that seemed to loom like a mountain in the corner. Warren stood by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "There's a nightgown in the wardrobe," he said finally, still not turning around. "And a robe, everything you might need." "What I need is to go home," Maybelle said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is your home now." She watched him pour 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter, offering one to her. She didn't take it. "I don't expect anything from you tonight," he said, setting her glass on the dresser. "Or any night, until you're ready, if you're ever ready." Maybelle's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Then why did you marry me?" "Your father's debt needed settling. This seemed the most civilized solution." "Civilized?" She laughed bitterly. "You call forcing a woman into marriage civilized?" Warren finally turned to face her, and in the lamplight, she could see lines of weariness etched deep into his features. "Would you have preferred I took your families home, scattered them to the winds? At least this way, they're provided for. And I'm the price." "Yes," he said simply. "You're the price." His honesty caught her off guard. She'd expected excuses, justifications, perhaps even romantic notions about having admired her from afar. Instead, he offered her the bare truth. "The door locks from the inside." Warren continued, gesturing to her bedroom door. "You'll find I had a separate room prepared for myself down the hall. You won't be disturbed." Before she could respond, he drained his whiskey and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Maybelle heard his footsteps recede down the hallway, then the sound of another door closing. She stood frozen for a long moment, then rushed to the door and turned the heavy iron key in the lock. The click echoed in the silence. Only then did she allow herself to sink onto the bed, still in her wedding dress, and let the tears fall. The next morning, Maybelle woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to curtain. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back, and with it, the weight of her new reality. A soft knock came at the door. "Mrs. Dittmer, I've brought your breakfast." Mrs. Dittmer. The name felt foreign on her tongue. "Leave it outside," she called. "Yes, ma'am." She waited until the footsteps faded before cracking open the door. A tray sat on the hallway table. Coffee, biscuits, bacon, eggs, and fresh preserves. More food than her family sometimes saw in a week. She brought it inside and ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Days passed in this fashion. Maybelle remained in her room, venturing out only when she was certain the house was empty. The ranch hands and household staff quickly learned to work around her self-imposed exile. Meals appeared outside her door 3 times a day. Fresh clothing materialized in her wardrobe. Books began to appear with her meal trays. Novels, poetry, even newspapers from San Antonio. She devoured the books hungrily, desperate for any escape from her circumstances. Sometimes she would hear Warren's footsteps in the hallway, pausing outside her door, but he never knocked, never tried to enter, just stood there for a moment before moving on. On the 7th day, Maybelle's solitude was broken by familiar voices in the courtyard below. She rushed to the window to see Elizabeth and Sarah climbing down from a wagon, followed by her mother, looking frail but upright. "Maybelle," Sarah's voice carried up to her window. "Maybelle, where are you?" She flew down the stairs, not caring who might see her, and burst through the front door. Her sisters ran to her, nearly knocking her over with their enthusiasm. "We came to visit," Elizabeth announced. "Mr. Dittmer sent his wagon for us." Maybelle looked up to see Warren standing by the wagon, talking quietly with her mother. He glanced her way but didn't approach. "Are you all right?" her mother asked, studying Maybelle's face with concern. "You look pale." "I'm fine, Mama." The lie came easily. "Just adjusting." They spent the afternoon in the garden, her sisters chattering about everything that had happened in the week since the wedding. The church ladies had brought them new dresses. The pantry was full. Pa had even stayed sober for 3 whole days. "It's like magic," Sarah said, twirling in her new blue calico. "Ever since you married Mr. Dittmer, everything's been better." The words were a knife to Maybelle's heart. Her sacrifice had bought her family's happiness. Wasn't that worth something? As the sun began to sink, Warren appeared in the garden. "I'll have the wagon brought around to take you home," he told her mother. "Thank you, Mr. Dittmer, for everything." Her mother's gratitude was genuine, and Maybelle saw Warren shift uncomfortably. "No need for thanks. We're family now." After they left, Maybelle stood in the garden, watching the wagon disappear into the distance. She sensed Warren behind her before he spoke. "They can visit whenever you like," he said, "or you can visit them, as long as I come back." "Yes." She turned to face him. "Am I allowed to ask why you maintain this pretense? Why marry me if you have no intention of being a husband?" Warren was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Perhaps I simply wanted to prove that not all marriages need be prisons, even arranged ones." "Pretty words," Maybelle said. "But a cage is still a cage, whether the door is locked or not, if leaving means destroying everything you love." That night, for the first time, she didn't lock her door. The sound of guitar music woke her. It was past midnight, the moon full and bright through her window. The melody was haunting, beautiful and desperately sad. She crept to her door and opened it a crack. The music was coming from downstairs, against her better judgment. Maybelle pulled on her robe and followed the sound. She found Warren in his study, a room she'd never entered. He sat in a leather chair by the dying fire, a guitar across his lap, playing with his eyes closed. She must have made a sound because his eyes snapped open, his fingers stilled on the strings. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to intrude." "It's your house, too." He set the guitar aside. "Couldn't sleep." "The music woke me. It was beautiful." "My father taught me. Said a man needed something gentle in his life, else the harshness of this land would turn his heart to stone." He smiled ruefully. "I'm not sure it worked." Maybelle stepped into the room, drawn despite herself. The walls were lined with books, more than she'd ever seen outside a schoolhouse. A painting hung over the mantel, a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes. "Your wife," she said. It wasn't a question. "Margaret?" "Yes." Warren's voice was carefully neutral. "She died 15 years ago." "My father said she was young." 19, a year older than you are now." Maybelle studied the painting. The girl looked vivacious, full of life. Nothing like the man who sat before her now. "Did you love her?" "I thought I did, but I was young and foolish, and I mistook possession for love." He poured himself a drink. "Would you like some tea I can ring for?" "Whiskey's fine." He raised an eyebrow, but poured her a glass. The liquor burned, but it also warmed the cold knot in her chest. "She wasn't happy here," Warren continued, surprising her with his candor. "Hated the isolation, the dust, the endless sky. I thought if I just gave her enough things, dresses, jewels, parties, she'd learn to be content. But she didn't." "No, she didn't." He stared into the fire. "I found her one morning in the barn. She'd taken her own life rather than spend another day in this prison I'd built for her." The weight of his confession settled over the room like a shroud. Maybelle understood now why he kept his distance, why he'd given her a locked door and her own space. "I'm not her," she said quietly. "No," Warren agreed. You're stronger. That display at the church proved that. Margaret would have smiled and pretended, all while dying inside. You fight." "Is that why you leave me alone? You're afraid I'll follow her path?" "Partly, but mostly because I learned too late that you can't force someone to be happy. You can't buy contentment or command love." He met her eyes. "All you can do is offer freedom and hope it's enough." They sat in silence, sipping whiskey while the fire crackled. Finally, Maybelle rose to leave. "The books?" she said, pausing at the door. "Thank you for those." "There's plenty more where those came from. You're welcome to anything in this room." She nodded and left, but not before she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like hope. The next morning, she came down for breakfast. The household staff tried to hide their surprise as Maybelle entered the dining room where Warren was already seated, reading a newspaper. "Good morning," she said, taking the chair across from him. "Good morning." If he was shocked, he didn't show it. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough." They ate in companionable silence. When Warren rose to leave for his morning rounds, Maybelle spoke. "I'd like to learn about the ranch operations." Now he did look surprised. "Why?" "If I'm to live here, I should understand how it works. Besides," she added with a slight smile, "I need something to do besides read novels and feel sorry for myself." "The work's hard, dusty, not fit for a lady." "Good thing I ain't much of a lady, then." Warren studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow morning, then be ready at dawn." That night, Maybelle heard the guitar again. This time, she didn't go downstairs, but she left her door open, letting the sad, sweet music wash over her as she drifted off to sleep. For the first time since her wedding day, she didn't dream of cages. The morning sun painted the horizon in shades of amber and rose as Warren led 2 saddled horses from the stable. Maybelle stood in the courtyard, dressed in a practical riding skirt and blouse she'd found in her wardrobe. her hair braided and pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "You know how to ride?" Warren asked, handing her the reins of a gentle-looking mare. "Since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." She swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, noting his slight nod of approval. They rode in silence for the first mile, following a well-worn trail that wound through scrubland and mesquite. The morning air was cool and sweet, filled with the scent of sage and wildflowers. Despite everything, Maybelle felt something ease in her chest. Out here, under the endless sky, she could almost forget she was a bought bride. "Where are we headed?" she asked as they crested a small hill. "There's something I want to show you." Warren spurred his horse into an easy lope, and Maybelle followed. They rode for another hour, the landscape gradually changing from flat prairie to rolling hills dotted with oak and cottonwood. Finally, Warren slowed his mount and pointed ahead. "There!" Maybelle gasped. Before them stretched a valley she'd never seen before, carpeted in wildflowers that swayed in the morning breeze like a living ocean of color. A stream wound through the middle, its waters catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. But what drew her eye was the crossroads at the valley's heart, two distinct paths diverging in opposite directions. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "My father showed me this place when I was a boy," Warren said, dismounting. "Called it Decision Valley. Said every man faces a crossroads in his life where he must choose his path." Maybelle slid from her saddle, walking to the edge of the overlook. "And what did you choose?" "The wrong path, more often than not." He stood beside her, but not too close. "That road to the east leads straight back to Dry Creek. 2 hours ride, maybe 3 if you pace yourself." Her heart stuttered. "And the other?" "Back to the ranch." He turned to face her fully. "Maybelle, I brought you here for a reason." She waited, hardly daring to breathe. "I want you to choose." His gray eyes were serious, intense. "Right here, right now. Take the eastern road, and I won't follow. I'll send your things along later. Tell folks you're visiting family. Give you time to figure out what you want to do. The marriage can be annulled. I'll take the scandal on myself. Say I couldn't fulfill my husbandly duties. Your family keeps everything I've given them. No debts, no obligations. And if I take the road back to the ranch, then you come as my wife. Not because you were forced or sold or had no choice, but because you chose it. Chose me. Chose this life." He pulled a leather pouch from his saddlebag and pressed it into her hands. It was heavy with coins. "There's enough there to get you anywhere you want to go. San Antonio, Houston, even back east if that's your fancy." Maybelle stared at the money, then at the crossroads, then at Warren. "Why?" The word came out cracked, confused. "Why would you do this?" "Because I've lived with the ghost of a woman who had no choices for 15 years. I won't live with another." He moved back to his horse, gathering the reins. "I'll wait at the ranch until sunset. If you're not back by then, I'll know your decision." "Warren, wait." But he was already mounting up, turning his horse back the way they'd come. "The mare knows both roads," he called over his shoulder. "Trust her to get you where you need to go." And then he was gone, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Maybelle stood frozen, the money pouch clutched in her hands. Freedom. He was offering her freedom, real and true. No tricks, no conditions. She could ride east right now. Start fresh in a new town where nobody knew her as the girl who'd been sold to settle a debt. She walked to the crossroads, standing exactly where the paths diverged. The eastern road beckoned, promising escape from a marriage she'd never wanted, a life she'd never chosen. She could find work as a seamstress or schoolteacher, make her own way, send money back to her family when she could. But her family. Warren had promised they'd keep everything. But would he honor that promise once she'd humiliated him by running? And even if he did, what would happen the next time Pa fell into debt? Who would he sell next? Elizabeth Sarah. No, that wasn't the whole truth. And Maybelle forced herself to face it. She wasn't staying just for her family these past weeks. She'd seen glimpses of the man beneath Warren's stern exterior, the way he'd given her space to grieve her lost freedom, the books left outside her door, chosen with care, the guitar music in the night, speaking of loneliness that matched her own. And yesterday morning, when she'd said she wasn't much of a lady, she'd caught the ghost of a smile on his face, not mocking or condescending, but appreciative, like he'd recognized a kindred spirit. "You're a damn fool, Maybelle Quinn," she told herself. Dittmer, Maybelle Dittmer. The name still felt foreign, but maybe that would change. Maybe everything would change if she went back not as a purchased bride, but as a woman who'd chosen her path. She tucked the money pouch into her saddlebag and mounted the mare. The horse stood patiently at the crossroads, ears flicking back as if waiting for direction. "Well, girl," Maybelle said, stroking the mare's neck, "I reckon we both know I was never much good at taking the easy road." She turned the horse west, toward the ranch, toward Warren, toward a future she was finally choosing for herself. The mare broke into an easy canter, seeming eager to be home. The sun was high overhead by the time the ranch buildings came into view. Maybelle's heart hammered as she rode through the main gate. What if Warren had changed his mind? What if this had all been some elaborate test she'd failed by coming back? She found him in the corral, working with a young colt. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, his expression carefully neutral. Several ranch hands stopped their work to watch as she dismounted and walked toward him. "I took the long way," she said, "had some thinking to do." Warren handed the colt's lead rope to a ranch hand and came to meet her at the fence. "And what did you conclude?" She pulled out the money pouch and held it out to him. "I concluded that I don't want your money. I don't want your pity. And I damn sure don't want to run away like a thief in the night." "Then what do you want?" Maybelle took a deep breath. "I want to learn everything about running this ranch. I want to ride every inch of this land until I know it like my own heartbeat. I want to sit by the fire in the evening and hear you play that guitar without having to sneak around like a ghost." Warren's careful mask slipped just a fraction, revealing something that might have been hope. "I want a real marriage," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Not the kind built on debt and desperation, but something we choose to build together, day by day, brick by brick. It might take time, maybe a long time, but I'm willing to try if you are." "You came back," he said softly, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. "I chose to come back. There's a difference." "Yes," he agreed. "There is." They stood there for a moment, the weight of her decision settling between them like a promise. Then Warren did something that surprised her. He smiled, not the careful, controlled expression she'd seen before, but a real smile that transformed his weathered features. "Well then, Mrs. Dittmer," he said, opening the corral gate, "if you're going to learn about ranching, might as well start with the basics. Ever break a colt before?" "Can't say as I have." "Then you're in for an education. Jim," he called to one of the hands, "bring around that bay yearling. Mrs. Dittmer's joining us for training today." The ranch hand's eyes widened, but he hurried to comply. Word spread quickly through the compound. The boss's new wife had not only emerged from her self-imposed isolation, but was planning to work alongside the men. As the afternoon wore on, Maybelle found herself covered in dust and sweat, her hands rope-burned and her muscles aching. Warren was a patient teacher, showing her how to approach the skittish colt, how to read its body language, how to build trust with gentle persistence. "It's not about breaking their spirit," he explained as they watched the colt gradually accept the weight of a saddle blanket. "It's about partnership, showing them they can trust you to keep them safe." "Like marriage," Maybelle said without thinking, then flushed. Warren's hands stilled on the rope. "Yes," he said quietly, "exactly like that." As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they walked back to the house together. Maybelle was limping slightly. She'd been stepped on twice and thrown once, but she felt more alive than she had in weeks. "Same time tomorrow?" Warren asked as they reached the porch. "Wouldn't miss it." She started up the steps, then paused. "Warren, that crossroads, have you taken anyone else there?" "No." "Why me?" He considered the question, his gray eyes thoughtful in the fading light. "Because when you drove that knife into the church pulpit and declared you weren't a horse to be traded, I saw something I recognized, a wild spirit that would die in captivity but might choose to stay if given freedom. And if I'd chosen the eastern road, then I'd have known I was wrong." He tipped his hat to her. "But I'm glad I wasn't. Good evening, Maybelle." "Good evening, Warren." She watched him walk toward his study, probably to pour his evening whiskey and pick up his guitar. This time, she thought, maybe she'd join him. Not because she had to, not because it was expected, but because she chose to. As she climbed the stairs to wash off the day's dust, Maybelle marveled at how different everything looked when it was chosen rather than forced. The house didn't feel like a prison anymore. Her wedding ring didn't feel like a shackle. She'd stood at the crossroads and chosen her path. Now all that remained was to see where it would lead. The weeks following Maybelle's choice at the crossroads settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Dawn found her in the stables, learning the temperament of each horse. Mornings were spent riding the range with Warren, checking fence lines and water sources. Afternoons brought ledger work in the study, where she discovered a sharp mind for figures that surprised them both. But evenings were her favorite time. After dinner, she would join Warren in his study, curled in the leather chair across from his while he played guitar, or they talked about everything and nothing, the price of cattle, the books they were reading, memories of childhood. It was during one such evening, 6 weeks after the crossroads, that Warren set down his guitar with unusual care. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made Maybelle look up from her book. "What is it?" Warren poured himself a whiskey, 2 fingers, she noted, not his usual one. "About Margaret, about how she really died." Maybelle closed her book slowly. In all their evening talks, they'd skirted around the subject of his first wife like dancers avoiding a hole in the floor. "You said she took her own life." "She did." Warren stared into his glass as if it held answers. "But there's more to it. She was with child when she died." The words hung in the air like smoke. Maybelle felt her chest tighten. "The baby wasn't mine," Warren continued, his voice flat. "Couldn't have been. We hadn't. That is, our marriage was much like ours has been. Separate rooms, polite distance. I thought I was being considerate, giving her time to adjust." "Warren." "She fell in love with one of the ranch hands, young fellow named Daniel, about her age, full of dreams and poetry." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Everything I wasn't. When she told me about the baby, she begged me to let her go, to give her a divorce so she could marry him." "But you refused." Maybelle kept her voice neutral, withholding judgment. "I might as well have signed her death warrant." Warren drained his glass. "I told her no decent woman left her husband, that she'd made vows before God, that I'd provide for the child as my own, but she would stay my wife." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Maybelle could picture it too clearly. A young woman trapped between society's expectations and her heart's desires. "Daniel left that same night. Couldn't stand to stay and watch her with me. I suppose, Margaret, she lasted 3 more days before she decided no life was better than a life without choice." Maybelle finished softly. Warren's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with surprise. "Yes, exactly that." "Is that why you took me to the crossroads? Why you gave me the choice she never had?" "Partly, but also because I saw in you what I was too blind to see in her strength." She bent until she broke. You bend like a willow in the wind, but always spring back stronger." Maybelle rose from her chair and moved to the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "We're all stronger than we know until we're tested. Margaret might have surprised you, given the chance. Perhaps. Warren joined her at the window, standing close but not touching. I've lived with the guilt for 15 years. Some days it's like a stone in my chest. Other days I can almost forgive myself. Those days have come more often since you chose to stay. She turned to face him, studying the lines of his face in the lamplight. Do you think she would forgive you? I used to think not. But watching you these past weeks, seeing how you've bloomed when given freedom to choose your own way, I think maybe she would want me to learn from my mistakes, to do better. You are doing better, Maybelle said firmly. Every choice you give me, every door you don't lock, every question you ask instead of command you give, you're doing better. Something shifted in Warren's expression, a vulnerability she'd never seen before. I was only 25 when I married Margaret, not much older than you are now. I thought being a man meant being hard, unyielding. My father taught me that showing softness was showing weakness. And now? Now I think strength might be something else entirely. The courage to be gentle, the wisdom to bend rather than break others. He lifted his hand as if to touch her cheek, then let it fall. You're teaching me that. We're teaching each other, Maybelle corrected. I'm learning too, learning that trust can be built slowly, one day at a time, learning that a man can be both strong and kind. They stood in comfortable silence, the space between them feeling less like distance and more like promise. Finally, Warren stepped back. I should let you retire. Dawn comes early. Warren, she called as he reached the door. Thank you for telling me. About Margaret, it couldn't have been easy. No, he agreed. But you deserve to know, to understand why I am the way I am. We all have our ghosts, Maybelle said. The trick is learning not to let them steer the wagon. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good night, Maybelle. Good night, Warren. The next morning brought an unexpected test of their growing bond. Maybelle was in the kitchen, helping Rosa, the cook, plan the week's meals when young Jim burst through the door. Mrs. Dittmer, come quick, the boss got thrown. Maybelle's blood turned to ice. She ran to the corral, Rosa's worried Spanish prayers following her. She found Warren sitting on the ground, his face white with pain, cradling his left arm. It's nothing, he said through gritted teeth as she knelt beside him. Just a dislocated shoulder. Nothing my eye, Maybelle shot back. Jim, ride for Doc Stevens, fast as you can. No need, Warren insisted. Just help me up and... Warren Dittmer, you stubborn mule. You'll sit right there until the doctor comes or I'll hog-tie you myself. Despite the pain, amusement flickered in his eyes. Yes, ma'am. While they waited for the doctor, Maybelle fashioned a sling from her apron and held a cool cloth to Warren's forehead. The ranch hands stood in a worried cluster, unused to seeing their invincible boss brought low. What happened? She asked Tom, the senior foreman. The new stallion spooked at a rattler, Tom explained. Boss held on longer than any man had a right to, but that horse was determined to plant him. Where's the stallion now? Calming down in the far corral. Mean bastard, pardon my language. Ma'am, Boss was the only one brave enough to try him. Or foolish enough, Maybelle thought but didn't say. She smoothed Warren's hair back from his forehead, feeling the tremor that ran through him. Pain bad? She asked softly. Had worse, he said, but his jaw was clenched tight. No need to play the hero with me, she chided. I've seen you vulnerable. Remember that night with the guitar? That was different. Why? Because that was pain of the heart instead of the body. She kept her voice low, aware of the watching men. Pain is pain, Warren, and there's no shame in feeling it. Doc Stevens arrived within the hour, setting Warren's shoulder with practiced efficiency that still drew a sharp cry from the patient. Maybelle held Warren's good hand throughout, pretending not to notice when he gripped it hard enough to leave bruises. 6 weeks in a sling. Doc Stevens pronounced, no riding, no roping, no ranch work, complete rest. Warren started to protest, but Maybelle cut him off. He'll follow your orders to the letter. Doc, I'll see to it. After the doctor left, Warren looked at her with mingled frustration and admiration. 6 weeks. The ranch can't run itself for 6 weeks. Good thing it doesn't have to, Maybelle said briskly. Tom's been foreman for how long? 20 years. He knows what needs doing. And I've been learning the books. Between us, we'll manage. You, Warren's eyebrows rose. You'll help run the ranch. Unless you think a woman's not capable. After watching you these past weeks, I think you're capable of anything you set your mind to. He struggled to his feet, wincing. But the men might not take orders from the boss's wife. They will if you tell them to. She slipped her arm around his waist to steady him. Come on, let's get you inside. Then you can call a meeting and make it official. As they walked slowly toward the house, Warren leaning on her more heavily than his pride wanted to admit, he said, Margaret would have fainted at the sight of blood. Good thing I'm not Margaret, then, Maybelle replied, though I might faint if you keep comparing us. That's got to stop. Warren, I mean it. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just do better. I'm trying. I know. She helped him up the porch steps. That's why I'm still here. The next 6 weeks proved to be a turning point in more ways than one. With Warren confined to the house, Maybelle stepped into the void, working alongside Tom to keep the ranch running smoothly. The men were skeptical at first, but her practical knowledge and willingness to get her hands dirty won them over. She came in each evening dusty and exhausted, full of stories about the day's adventures. Warren would listen from his chair by the fire, offering advice and approval in equal measure. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name, pride mixed with something warmer, deeper. It was during the 4th week of his convalescence that everything shifted. Maybelle had spent the day helping with a difficult calving and came in splattered with mud and blood, triumphant but exhausted. We saved her, she announced, collapsing into her chair. The calf, too. Tom said he's never seen anyone so small pull a calf that big. You're remarkable, Warren said quietly. You know that? Something in his tone made her look up. He was gazing at her with that nameless expression again, but stronger now, unmistakable. Warren, I've been thinking, he said slowly, about choices and chances, about the difference between falling in love and choosing to love. Maybelle's heart began to race, and I think I understand now. With Margaret, I felt like falling off a horse, sudden, jarring, no control. But with you, he stood, crossing to where she sat. With you, it's been a choice, every day. I choose to admire your strength, choose to cherish your laughter, choose to love the way you've made this house a home. Warren, let me finish, please. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his good one. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I needed you to know I love you, Maybelle. Not because you're my wife, but because of who you are, fierce and gentle, practical and dreamy, stronger than rawhide and softer than silk. Tears pricked Maybelle's eyes. You foolish man! I've been waiting weeks for you to figure that out. Hope bloomed across his features. You mean? I mean I choose you too, Warren Dittmer, every day. I choose you. The kiss that followed was nothing like the one they'd avoided at their wedding. This was chosen, mutual, full of promise and passion held in check for too long. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. So what happens now? Maybelle asked. Warren smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Now we build, day by day, choice by choice, together. Together, she agreed, and kissed him again. Outside, the Texas sun set in a blaze of glory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. But inside the ranch house, two souls who had found each other through pain and patience barely noticed. They were too busy choosing their future, one moment at a time. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a dusty rider who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Maybelle was in the kitchen garden, picking tomatoes for Rosa, when she heard the commotion in the yard. "Message for Mrs. Dittmer," the rider called out. "From town." Her blood ran cold at the sight of Elizabeth's familiar handwriting on the envelope. Her sister's penmanship, usually so neat and careful, was hurried, almost frantic. Maybelle tore open the letter with trembling fingers. "Dearest Maybelle, come quickly. Pa's drinking worse than ever. He owes money to Jake Morrison from the saloon. Morrison says if Pa doesn't pay by week's end, he'll take me his payment. Pa's too drunk to care. He says 14 is old enough to work off a debt. Please, I'm so scared. Elizabeth." The letter fluttered from Maybelle's numb fingers. 14. Her baby sister was only 14, still playing with dolls when she thought no one was looking. The idea of her in Jake Morrison's hands, a man known for his rough treatment of the saloon girls, made bile rise in her throat. "Maybelle," Warren's voice came from behind her. He'd heard the commotion and come to investigate, his arm still in its sling from the riding accident. "What's wrong?" Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. She watched his face darken as he read, saw his jaw clench with controlled fury. "Get Tom," he said quietly. "Tell him to ready the wagon. We're going to town." "Warren, your shoulder." "Damn my shoulder." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "That's your sister. That's family. We're going." Within an hour, they were on the road to Dry Creek, Warren grimly holding the reins despite his injury. Maybelle had strapped on her father's old pistol, hidden these many months in her trunk. She'd never shot a man, but for Elizabeth, she'd learn. "What's the law on this?" she asked as the town came into view. "Can Morrison really—" "Debt bondage isn't slavery, but it's close enough," Warren said tightly. "If your father signed papers while drunk, a sympathetic judge might void them, but Judge Carter isn't known for his sympathy, especially toward young women. Then we'll have to find another way." The Quinn cabin looked even shabbier than Maybelle remembered. Empty bottles littered the porch, and the stench of stale whiskey hit them before they'd even reached the door. They found Samuel passed out at the kitchen table, an empty jug at his elbow. "Pa," Maybelle shook him roughly. "Pa, wake up." Samuel stirred, blinking blearily. "Maybelle, what are you doing here?" "What have you done?" She could barely contain her rage. "What have you done to Elizabeth?" "Man's gotta pay his debts," Samuel slurred. "Morrison said he'd wait if I gave him collateral." "She's not collateral." Maybelle slammed her hand on the table. "She's your daughter." "Where is Elizabeth now?" Warren asked, his calm voice a counterpoint to Maybelle's fury. "Upstairs with Sarah," Samuel mumbled. "Morrison said he'd come for her Sunday if I don't pay." "How much?" Warren's tone was businesslike. $200. Maybelle gasped. "It might as well have been 2,000. How did you—" "Cards," Samuel said simply. "Had a system. Can't lose system." Warren pulled Maybelle aside. "I can cover it," he said quietly. "No." Her response was immediate and fierce. "You've already paid his debts once. If you do it again, this will never stop. He'll just keep gambling, keep drinking, keep using us as currency." "Then what do you suggest?" Maybelle's mind raced. "Morrison owns the saloon, right in the gambling tables." "Yes. Then we hit him where it hurts. His business." A plan began to form, wild and dangerous. "But first, we get the girls somewhere safe." They found Elizabeth and Sarah huddled together in the tiny bedroom they shared. Elizabeth flew into Maybelle's arms, sobbing with relief. I knew you'd come, she whispered. I knew you wouldn't let him take me. Never, Maybelle promised fiercely. Pack your things, both of you. You're coming to the ranch. But Pa's made his choice. Now I'm making mine. While the girls gathered their meager belonging, Warren confronted Samuel. You're signing guardianship papers, today, giving Maybelle legal custody of her sisters. Now wait just a minute. No. Warren's voice was steel. You've proven you can't protect them. Sign the papers, or I'll make sure everyone in 3 counties knows what you tried to do to your own daughter. Samuel's face went purple, but something in Warren's eyes made him reach for the pen. With the girls safely installed at the ranch under Rosa's watchful eye, Maybelle and Warren rode back to town as the sun set. The saloon was already rowdy with evening drinkers and gamblers. You sure about this? Warren asked as they tied their horses outside. Jake Morrison thinks he can buy a 14-year-old girl to pay a gambling debt, Maybelle said grimly. I aim to show him different. They pushed through the saloon doors together. The room fell silent at the sight of Warren Dittmer and his wife. Morrison stood behind the bar, a big man with mean eyes and scarred knuckles. Well, Morrison drawled. Come to pay your daddy's debt, Mrs. Dittmer. In a manner of speaking, Maybelle walked to the nearest poker table. I propose a different arrangement. A game. You and me. Morrison laughed, a harsh bark of sound. Women don't gamble in my establishment. Scared you'll lose. The laughter died. What stakes? If I win, my father's debt is cleared, all of it, and you never extend him credit again. And if you lose, Maybelle steeled herself. Then I'll work off the debt myself, not Elizabeth, me. Maybelle, no! Warren started forward, but she held up a hand. My choice. Remember. Morrison's eyes gleamed with avarice as they traveled over her. Deal. The crowd pressed close as Morrison shuffled the cards. Maybelle had learned poker from an old ranch hand when she was 12, practicing with beans instead of money. She'd gotten good, very good, but she'd never played for stakes like these. The first few hands went Morrison's way. He grinned, confident, ordering drinks for the house on his coming windfall. Warren stood behind Maybelle's chair, his presence a steady comfort even as her chip stack dwindled. Then Maybelle noticed something. A tiny Morrison touched his ear when he bluffed. It was subtle, but it was there. She began to play differently, folding when he was strong, pushing when he was weak. Getting nervous. Morrison, she asked sweetly as she raked in a sizable pot. His face darkened. Just deal. The crowd had grown, men abandoning their own games to watch this unprecedented scene. A woman playing poker in Morrison's own saloon, and winning. It came down to one final hand. Maybelle looked at her cards. A pair of queens. Not great, but not terrible. Morrison was sweating now, his tell more pronounced. All in, he growled, pushing his remaining chips forward. Maybelle studied him. His hand went to his ear. Just for a second, he was bluffing. Call. She pushed her chips in. Morrison flipped his cards triumphantly. A pair of 10s. His grin faltered when he saw her queens. Looks like I win, Maybelle said calmly. My father's debt is cleared, and if you ever come near my sisters again, you'll answer to me, and to my husband, and to every decent person in this town who's sick of you preying on the desperate. Morrison's face was purple with rage. You cheated. You must have... Careful, Warren said quietly. You're accusing my wife in front of witnesses. That's a serious charge. Everyone saw it was a fair game, called out Doc Stevens from the crowd. The lady won square. Other voices joined in agreement. Morrison realized he was outnumbered and backed down, but his eyes promised retribution. Outside, Maybelle's hands finally started shaking. Warren wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her close. That was the bravest, Most foolish thing I've ever seen. He murmured into her hair. I couldn't let him take her. I couldn't. I know, but Maybelle, you risked yourself. Like you would have done for me. She pulled back to look at him. That's what family does. They protect each other. What about your father? He won't change. No, he won't. The knowledge hurt, but she'd accepted it. But the girls are safe now. That's what matters. They collected Elizabeth and Sarah from the ranch and returned to town one more time that week to the church, where Reverend Mills witnessed the legal transfer of guardianship. Samuel didn't attend. He was already drunk at Morrison's, running up a new tab. But this time, his daughters weren't available as collateral. That night, as Maybelle tucked Elizabeth into her new bedroom at the ranch, her sister caught her hand. I was so scared, Elizabeth whispered. I thought I'd end up like those girls at the saloon, the ones with the sad eyes. Never, Maybelle said fiercely. You're going to have choices. Lizzie, real choices, education, opportunities, the chance to marry for love or not marry at all. I promise you that. Like you did marry for love. Maybelle thought of Warren, waiting downstairs with his guitar, of the way he'd stood behind her in that saloon, trusting her judgment even when she was risking everything. Yes, she said softly, exactly like I did. Later, she found Warren on the porch, watching the stars. His sling was gone. He'd torn it off in frustration after the confrontation with Morrison. How's the shoulder? She asked, settling beside him on the swing. Sore, but healing. He pulled her close. How are you? Angry, sad, grateful. She sighed. My father's lost to us. Warren, he chose whiskey over his own children. His loss, Warren said simply. Elizabeth and Sarah will thrive here. They'll have the childhood you should have had. We'll need to hire a tutor, and they'll need new clothes for school, and Maybelle. He kissed her gently. We have the means. Let me help you give them everything. It feels like we're building our own family, she said wonderingly. Is that strange? Not at all. The best families are often the ones we choose. They sat in comfortable silence, the vast Texas sky stretching endlessly above them. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the wind carried the scent of coming rain. Warren, Maybelle said suddenly, I need to tell you something. What is it? When I was playing cards with Morrison, when I went all in, I wasn't entirely sure I'd win, but I knew, win or lose, you'd find a way to keep me safe. That's why I could take the risk. His arm tightened around her. Always, he promised. Always. Inside the house, Elizabeth and Sarah slept peacefully in their new beds, safe from the harsh world that had tried to claim them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison wouldn't forget his humiliation easily, and Samuel would likely cause more trouble. But tonight, the Dittmer Ranch stood as a fortress of chosen family and protective love. Maybelle had once thought marriage meant captivity. Now she understood it could mean something else entirely. Partnership, protection, and the power that came from two people choosing to face the world together. She'd gambled everything on that understanding, and she'd won more than just a card game. She'd won a future for her sisters, and a deeper bond with the man who'd given her the freedom to choose. And that, she thought as she rested her head on Warren's shoulder, was worth any risk. The acrid smell of smoke pulled Maybelle from her sleep. She sat bolt upright, her heart hammering as she recognized the orange glow flickering against their bedroom curtains. Warren was already at the window, yanking on his boots. Fire, he shouted. The barn's on fire. They raced downstairs, Maybelle pausing only to pound on Elizabeth and Sarah's door. Girls, get up, get outside. The scene in the yard was chaos. Flames engulfed the eastern barn, the one housing their prize breeding stock. Ranch hands ran with buckets, forming a desperate line from the water pump, but it was like trying to stop a flood with teacups. The horses, Tom shouted over the roar of flames. "There's still 6 inside!" Without thinking, Maybelle grabbed a blanket from the porch, dunked it in the water trough, and ran toward the burning building. She heard Warren shout behind her, but didn't stop. Those horses were their future, the foundation of their breeding program. The heat hit her like a physical wall. Smoke stung her eyes and seared her lungs, but she pressed forward. The horses were screaming, a sound that would haunt her dreams. She found the first stall, fumbling with the latch. "Easy, easy," she crooned, though she could barely hear herself over the crackling flames. The mare was wild with terror, but Maybelle threw the wet blanket over her head and let her out, one by one. She went back, Warren joining her after the second trip. "You trying to get yourself killed?" he yelled as they let out the 4th and 5th horses. "Same as you," she shot back. The 6th horse, their prize stallion, was in the farthest stall. The roof was starting to collapse, flaming timber falling like rain. Warren tried to hold her back, but Maybelle shrugged him off. "Together or not at all," she said. They went in together, found the stallion, and let him out just as the roof came down behind them with a tremendous crash. They stumbled into the yard, coughing and blackened with soot, but alive. It was only then that Maybelle noticed the figure standing at the edge of the firelight. Jake Morrison, with 2 of his men, watching the destruction with satisfied eyes. Morrison Warren started forward, but Tom and the other hands held him back. "Just enjoying the show. Dittmer." Morrison called out, "Funny how dry wood catches so easy. Course, you probably shouldn't leave lanterns burning in a barn full of hay." "We didn't," Maybelle began, but Warren squeezed her hand. "Get off my land, Morrison, now!" Morrison tipped his hat mockingly. "Sure thing. Hope you got insurance. Hate to see a man's dreams go up in smoke." He paused, his eyes finding Maybelle. "Or a woman's." After they left, Maybelle turned to Warren. "He did this. We both know he did this." Knowing and proving are 2 different things. Warren's face was grim. "But this isn't over." They spent the rest of the night fighting to keep the fire from spreading, finally containing it as dawn broke. The barn was a total loss, thousands of dollars in damage, but thanks to their efforts, no lives were lost. As Maybelle stood surveying the smoldering ruins, something hardened inside her. Morrison had tried to hurt them where he thought they were weakest. He'd learned that was a mistake. "Rosa," she called to the cook, who'd spent the night making coffee and sandwiches for the firefighters. "I need you to do something for me, quietly." That evening, while Warren met with Tom about rebuilding plans, Maybelle slipped away. She'd traded her dress for men's clothing borrowed from one of the younger ranch hands, her hair tucked up under a hat. In the darkness, she could pass for a boy. Morrison's saloon was rowdy as always. Maybelle circled to the back, where she knew Morrison kept his office. The window was open against the heat. Perfect. She'd learned a lot in her weeks of ranch work, including how to move silently. She slipped through the window like a shadow, finding herself in Morrison's private domain. The safe sat in the corner, supposedly impregnable. But Maybelle had learned things in her hardscrabble childhood that proper ladies weren't supposed to know, like how to pick locks, taught by a traveling tinker in exchange for a hot meal. The safe's lock was more complex, but the principle was the same. Inside, she found what she was looking for: Morrison's private ledgers. The real ones, not the sanitized versions he showed the tax collector. Debts owed, bribes paid, shipments of illegal liquor from Mexico, enough to ruin him. She also found something else, a letter in her father's shaky handwriting. "Morrison, she's yours if you clear the debt. The older one, Maybelle, always was too proud. You'll enjoy breaking her. Samuel Quinn." Her hands shook as she read it. Dated 3 days before her wedding to Warren. Her own father had tried to sell her to Morrison first. Only Warren's prior claim had saved her. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Maybelle quickly photographed the pages with a small camera she'd borrowed from Doc Stevens. He used it to document medical cases. She'd just closed the safe when the door opened. Morrison stood there, gun in hand. Well, well, a thief in the night. His eyes widened as he recognized her. Mrs. Dittmer. This is unexpected. Not a thief, Maybelle said calmly, though her heart was racing. Just returning something that belongs to me. She held up her father's letter. Morrison's face darkened. That's private property. So was I, apparently. She struck a match from the desk. Funny how paper burns so easily, almost like barnwood. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? She held the flame close to the letter. Here's what's going to happen. Morrison, you're going to forget about my family. No more threats, no more fires, no more anything. Or else those photographs I just took of your real ledgers find their way to the federal marshal in San Antonio. You're bluffing. Try me. She let the letter catch fire, dropping it into the metal wastebasket. I learned to play poker from the best. Remember, and I learned something else that night. Sometimes you have to be willing to burn it all down to protect what matters. Morrison's gun wavered. He was a bully and a criminal, but he wasn't stupid. Federal prison versus leaving the Dittmers alone. Not a hard choice. Get out, he growled. Maybelle moved to the window, then paused. Oh, and Morrison, if anything happens to me or mine, Doc Stevens has copies of those photographs with instructions. She slipped out the window and melted into the night. Her knees didn't start shaking until she was halfway home. Warren was waiting on the porch, his face like thunder. Where in the hell have you been? Ending this. She pulled out the camera and placed it in his hands. We need to get these developed and sent to Doc Stevens. Insurance. Maybelle, what did you do? She told him everything. By the end, he was sitting with his head in his hands. You could have been killed. So could you, running into that barn. That's different. No, Warren, it's not. She knelt in front of him, taking his hands. We're partners. In everything. Sometimes that means I protect you, too. He pulled her up into his lap, holding her tight. You magnificent, terrifying woman. What did I do to deserve you? You gave me a choice, she said simply, and I chose to fight for us. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A federal marshal and 2 deputies rode up to the ranch just after breakfast. Marshal Conway. The lead man introduced himself. We're looking for Jake Morrison. Seems he lit out in the middle of the night. You folks wouldn't know anything about that. Can't say that we do, Warren replied evenly. Funny thing, Conway continued. Found his office cleaned out, but he left some interesting papers behind. Evidence of smuggling, tax evasion, all sorts of things, almost like someone wanted us to find them. How fortunate, Maybelle murmured. Conway's eyes twinkled. Ain't it just well? If Morrison shows up here, you let us know. Man's got a lot to answer for. After they left, Warren turned to Maybelle. Did you? I might have left a few things behind when I visited his office. For the authorities to find. She smiled innocently. Shame about him running off. But I hear Mexico's nice this time of year. That night, the whole ranch celebrated. The barn was gone, but they'd saved the horses and Morrison was no longer a threat. Elizabeth and Sarah danced with the ranch hands, while Rosa played guitar and sang Mexican folk songs. Warren found Maybelle standing apart, watching the festivities with a thoughtful expression. What are you thinking? About choices, she said. About how different everything might have been. If Morrison had gotten to me before you did. If I hadn't fought back. If you hadn't given me freedom. But he didn't. And you did. And here we are. Here we are, she agreed. Warren, I need to tell you something. About last night, when I confronted Morrison. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Warren said, "It's acting despite it. He could have shot me, but he didn't." "I would do it again," she said fiercely. "To protect our family, our home, I'd do it 100 times. "I know." He kissed her forehead. "That's what terrifies me, and makes me love you even more." A commotion near the fire drew their attention. Tom was standing on a crate, calling for quiet. "Got something to say." The foreman announced, "We all know what Mrs. Dittmer did last night, risking her neck for this ranch, for all of us. And we know it ain't the first time. The way she worked when the boss was laid up, the way she saved them horses, the way she stands up for what's right." He raised his glass. "So, here's to Mrs. Dittmer. The boss might own this ranch, but she's its heart, to the bravest woman in Texas." "To Mrs. Dittmer," the crowd roared. Maybelle felt tears prick her eyes. These rough men, who'd once looked at her with skepticism, now raised their glasses in sincere tribute. She'd earned their respect through sweat and courage, not through being Warren's wife. "Speech," someone called out. Warren nudged her forward. "Go on. They're your people too. Now." Maybelle stepped up onto the crate Tom had vacated. The faces looking up at her were weathered and worn, but friendly. Family. In all the ways that mattered. "When I first came here," she began, "I thought I was a prisoner, but I learned something. Freedom isn't about having no obligations. It's about choosing your obligations, choosing your family, choosing your fights." She looked at Warren, then at her sisters, then at the assembled hands. "I choose all of you, this ranch, this life. And if anyone tries to take it from us, they'll learn what Morrison learned. We don't back down. We don't give up. And we protect our own." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in town. As Maybelle stepped down, Elizabeth and Sarah rushed to hug her. "You're amazing," Elizabeth whispered. "No," Maybelle said, looking over their heads at Warren. "I'm just a woman who learned the power of choice and chose to fight for what I love." The party went on late into the night, but eventually, Maybelle and Warren found themselves alone on the porch swing, watching the stars. "We'll rebuild the barn," Warren said. "Better than before." "I know." "Morrison won't be back." "I know that too." "Your father is no longer our problem." Her voice was firm. "He made his choices. Now he can live with them." They swayed in comfortable silence. Then Warren spoke again. "I've been thinking about the future, about children." Maybelle's breath caught. "Oh, would you want, that is, do you think, She laughed softly at his uncharacteristic fumbling. "Yes, Warren, when we're ready, when it's our choice." "Everything with you is about choice, isn't it?" "Everything important should be," she said. "That's what you taught me." "I think you taught yourself. I just gave you the space to do it." Then we taught each other, as if in agreement. A shooting star blazed across the Texas sky. Maybelle made a wish, then laughed at herself for the fancy. She didn't need wishes anymore. She had choices, and she'd chosen well. The burned barn stood as a reminder of the fight they'd won, but more importantly, of what they'd fought for. Not just property or pride, but the right to build their own lives on their own terms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be rebuilding to oversee, a ranch to run, sisters to raise. But tonight, Maybelle Dittmer sat with her husband under the vast Texas sky and knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. By choice. The first cool breeze of autumn whispered through the ranch as Maybelle stood in the doorway of the newly rebuilt barn. Stronger than before, Warren had said. And he'd been right. The fresh timber gleamed in the morning sun, a testament to their resilience. 6 months had passed since Morrison's flight to Mexico. 6 months of peace, prosperity, and something Maybelle had never dared hope for, genuine happiness. Elizabeth was thriving at school. Sarah had discovered a talent for drawing, and the ranch had never been more successful. But it was the change in her marriage that filled Maybelle with wonder. What had begun as a business arrangement, evolved into a partnership, had blossomed into something deeper. Love, yes, but more than that. A meeting of souls who had chosen each other not in spite of their scars, but because of how those scars had shaped them. Wool gathering again. Warren's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. She turned, smiling, just thinking how different everything is from a year ago. Better, immeasurably. She moved into his arms, feeling safe in a way she'd never imagined possible. Warren, I need to tell you something. He pulled back to study her face, concern flickering in his gray eyes. What is it? I went to see Doc Stevens yesterday. Are you ill? Why didn't you? I'm not ill. She took his hand, placing it gently on her still flat stomach. I'm expecting. The transformation of Warren's face was something Maybelle would treasure forever. Shock gave way to joy so profound it took her breath away. He dropped to his knees, pressing his face against her belly. A baby, he whispered. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, though she could see the answer written in every line of his body. He stood, cupping her face in his hands. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. Maybelle, I thought I'd lost my chance at this. After Margaret, I never dreamed. This is different, she said firmly. This baby is wanted, chosen, loved already. Like us, he said, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. That evening, they gathered the family to share the news. Elizabeth squealed with delight, already making plans to help with the baby. Sarah immediately wanted to draw pictures of what her niece or nephew might look like. Even the ranch hands seemed excited when word spread. Tom gruffly mentioning that it was about time this place had some young'uns running around again. But joy has a way of attracting trouble, and theirs came in the form of a well-dressed stranger who arrived the next morning. Name's Randolph Carver, he announced, producing a leather folder full of official-looking documents. Attorney at law, representing Mr. Samuel Quinn. Maybelle's blood ran cold. My father, what does he want? And Mr. Quinn is contesting the guardianship arrangement regarding his daughters Elizabeth and Sarah. Carver's smile was oily. He believes they were taken under duress and wishes them returned. Over my dead body, Maybelle said flatly, that would be unfortunate. Carver replied, but unnecessary. Mr. Quinn is willing to drop the matter for a consideration. How much? Warren's voice was dangerous. $5,000. Maybelle gasped. It was an enormous sum, enough to buy a small ranch. He's selling them. Again. Such harsh words. Let's call it compensation for his emotional distress. Carver set the papers on the hall table. You have 1 week to decide. After that, we proceed to court, and courts do favor natural parents, Mrs. Dittmer, especially fathers. After he left, Maybelle sank into a chair, one hand protectively over her belly. We can't let him take them back, Warren. We can't. We won't. Warren's jaw was set. But fighting this in court could get ugly. He might bring up your unconventional behavior, the gambling, the midnight visit to Morrison's office. Let him. I'm not ashamed of protecting my family. I know, but judges, they're traditional men, Maybelle. They might not see it that way. That night, unable to sleep, Maybelle found herself in Warren's study, staring at Margaret's portrait. The young woman smiled down at her, forever frozen in time. What would you do? She whispered to the painting. How would you fight for them? She wouldn't, Warren's voice came from the doorway. That was the difference between you. He joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Margaret was gentle, sweet, but she'd been taught that ladies don't fight. They endure, they submit. It killed her in the end. And me, You fight, with cards, with fire, with whatever weapons you have. He turned her to face him. That's why I love you, not in spite of your wildness, but because of it. Then you won't mind what I'm planning. Warren's eyes narrowed. What are you planning? To visit my father, one last time. Absolutely not. In your condition, I'm pregnant, not made of glass. She touched his face gently. Trust me, the way I trusted you at the crossroads. He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. What are you going to do? What I should have done months ago. Face him. End this, once and for all. The next morning, despite Warren's protests, Maybelle rode to town. She found her father, predictably, at Morrison's old saloon, now under new management. He looked worse than ever, thin, shaking, yellowed from drink. Well, if it ain't my high and mighty daughter, Samuel slurred as she approached. Come to pay up. Come to talk. She sat across from him, noting how he couldn't meet her eyes. Why, Pa, why are you doing this? Man's got a right to his children. You never wanted us. We were just burdens to you, mouths to feed, debts to pay. She leaned forward. Tell me the truth. Who put you up to this? Samuel's eyes darted away. Don't know what you mean. Carver didn't find you. Someone sent him. Someone who wants to hurt me and Warren, who... You always were too smart for your own good. Samuel reached for his drink, but Maybelle moved it away. Tell me. There's a man, from Dallas, says he's Margaret's brother. Maybelle's blood chilled. Warren had never mentioned Margaret having family. Richard Prescott, Samuel continued. Says Warren killed his sister. Wants revenge. Figured taking your sisters, making you pay, that'd be a start. And you agreed to help him your own daughter? He promised money. Lots of it. Samuel finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her sick. You got your rich husband? What do I gotta? You had a family, 3 daughters who would have loved you if you'd let them. She stood, looking down at the wreck of a man who'd sired her. But you chose whiskey instead, every time. Don't you lecture me. Girl, you don't know what it's like. I know exactly what it's like. Her voice was steel. I know what it's like to go hungry so you could drink, to lie to the neighbors about the bruises, to raise my sisters because you couldn't be bothered. I know all of it. Pa. She pulled out a piece of paper. This is a legal document. Sign it, and you get $1,000, enough to drink yourself to death in comfort. Don't sign it, and I'll make sure everyone in Texas knows exactly what kind of man you are. What you tried to do to Elizabeth, what you tried to do to me. You wouldn't. I drove Jake Morrison out of town. You think I won't do worse to you? Samuel's hand shook as he reached for the pen. What's it say? That you relinquish all claims to Elizabeth and Sarah, forever. That you'll leave Texas and never contact us again. She paused. It's more than you deserve, but I want this over. He signed, his signature barely legible. Maybelle left the money on the table and turned to go. Maybelle. She paused but didn't turn. Your mother would have been proud of you. Yes, she said quietly. She would have, despite you, not because of you. She left him there with his whiskey and his $1,000, knowing she'd never see him again. It hurt less than she'd expected. Some bonds were meant to be broken. But Richard Prescott was another matter. Maybelle rode home deep in thought, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Margaret's brother, seeking revenge. He must have learned about her father's debts, seen an opportunity. She found Warren in the corral, working with a new mare. His face darkened as she explained what she'd learned. Richard, he said heavily, I should have known he'd surface eventually. Why didn't you tell me Margaret had a brother? Because I hoped he'd stay in Dallas, living off her inheritance. Warren ran a hand through his hair. He blamed me for her death, said I'd driven her to it with my coldness. He wasn't entirely wrong. Warren, he wrote me after the funeral. Said someday he'd make me pay. I thought it was grief talking. His laugh was bitter. Seems he meant it. What do we do? We protect what's ours. Warren's eyes were flinty. He wants to hurt me by hurting you. That's not going to happen. 2 days later, Richard Prescott arrived in person. Maybelle watched from the window as he dismounted. Tall, thin, with Margaret's dark hair but none of her warmth. His eyes, when they found her watching, were cold as winter. Warren met him on the porch, not inviting him inside. Richard. Warren. Prescott's voice was cultured. Eastern. And this must be the new Mrs. Dietmar, the one you bought to replace my sister. Careful, Warren warned. Or what you'll drive me to suicide, too. Prescott's smile was sharp. I've been watching, learning about your child bride, daughter of the town drunk. Quite a step down from a Prescott. State your business, Warren said coldly. Justice for Margaret. Prescott pulled out a letter. Her diary. Did you know she kept one very detailed, all about her misery, her desperation, the baby that wasn't yours? Maybelle saw Warren flinch. I could make this public, Prescott continued. Destroy your reputation. Hers too, but she's past caring. Or you sign over half the ranch to me, Margaret's rightful inheritance. Shall we say, do that and I'll disappear. Refuse. He shrugged. Well, scandals have a way of destroying more than reputations. Bad for business, bad for raising children. You have 24 hours to leave town, Warren said quietly. After that, I won't be responsible. Prescott laughed. Still trying to be the big man you couldn't protect Margaret? What makes you think you can protect this one? He rode off, leaving poison in the air. That night, Maybelle found Warren in Margaret's room, a place he rarely entered. He was holding a small journal, tears tracking down his face. It's all here, he said hoarsely. Her pain, her loneliness, how trapped she felt. Maybelle took the journal gently, scanning the entries. Her heart broke for the young woman who'd written them, but also for the man who was torturing himself reading them. Warren, this isn't your fault. Isn't it I made her miserable? The situation made her miserable. The lack of choices, the expectations. She set the journal aside and took his hands. But that's not us. That's not our story. He'll ruin us. The scandal. We'll pass. Warren, look at me. She waited until his eyes met hers. I'm not Margaret. I'm not gentle or delicate or afraid of scandal. I'm the woman who stood up in church and declared I wasn't property. Everyone already knows I'm not conventional. But the baby will be born to parents who chose each other, who love each other. That's all that matters. She stood, pulling him up with her. Now come. We have a different visitor coming tonight. What visitor? Doc Stevens, with those photographs from Morrison's safe. She smiled grimly. You're not the only one who's been watching and learning. Doc Stevens arrived after sunset, carrying a leather satchel. Inside were copies of the photographs Maybelle had taken. But there was more. Did some digging after you asked? Doc said. This Richard Prescott isn't quite the grieving brother he pretends to be. Seems he's been blackmailing folks all over Dallas with various scandals. 3 businessmen, 2 judges, even a minister. A professional extortionist, Warren said slowly. Exactly, and there's more. Margaret's inheritance. He's already spent it. Gambling debts, bad investments. He needs money, and he figured you were an easy mark. Maybelle smiled. Not so easy after all. Doc, would you be willing to have a word with a Mr. Prescott? Explain about federal mail fraud charges, extortion across state lines. Be my pleasure, Doc said. Never did like bullies. The next morning, Prescott returned, cocky and confident. His confidence evaporated when he found not just Warren and Maybelle waiting, but Doc Stevens, Marshal Conway, and Judge Carter, the very judge who wasn't known for his sympathy. "Mr. Prescott," the judge said sternly, "I've been reviewing some interesting documents about your activities in Dallas. Seems you're wanted for questioning in several matters." "This is ridiculous. I'm here about my sister." "Your sister, who died 15 years ago," Doc interrupted. "Tragic, yes, but not licensed for criminal behavior." Marshal Conway stepped forward. "You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice." Prescott looked wildly from face to face, finding no sympathy. His eyes landed on Maybelle last. "You did this." "I protected my family," she said simply. "Something you might understand if you actually cared about your sister's memory instead of using it for profit." As the marshal led Prescott away, Judge Carter turned to the Dittmers. "Mrs. Dittmer, I owe you an apology. When you first came before me as a purchased bride, I thought you were just another victim. I see now I was wrong. We all have the power to change our stories." "Judge," Maybelle replied, "we just need the chance to choose." That evening, with the threats finally ended, Maybelle and Warren stood in what had been Margaret's room, together. They packed away her things, not in shame or secrecy, but with respectful finality. "She deserves peace," Maybelle said, wrapping the portrait carefully. "And so do you. What about the diary?" Maybelle took it to the fireplace. "Some pain doesn't need to be preserved." She looked at him. "Unless you object." "No," Warren's voice was firm. "Let it go. Let her go." They watched the pages curl and blacken, taking old guilt and grief with them. When it was done, Warren pulled Maybelle close. "I love you," he said against her hair. "Not because you're my wife, not because you're carrying our child, but because you're you. Fierce, loyal, brave, unstoppable you." "I love you too," she whispered, "because you gave me the freedom to become who I was meant to be." They stood together as the fire died down, the past finally laid to rest. Outside, night fell over the ranch, peaceful and full of promise. Maybelle placed Warren's hand on her belly, where their child grew. A child who would be born to love, not obligation, to choice, not force, to a future bright with possibility. "What now?" Warren asked. "Now," Maybelle smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Now we live, freely, fully together." "By choice," he agreed, and kissed her. In the ashes of the fireplace, the last remnants of the diary crumbled away, but in the hearts of the two people holding each other, something new and strong and beautiful had taken root. Not a love born of desperation or duty, but one chosen daily, deliberately, joyfully. And that made all the difference. Spring arrived early that year, painting the Texas hills in wildflowers and warming the air with promise. Maybelle stood in the garden she'd planted behind their new home, smaller than the grand ranch house but filled with light and laughter. Her hand rested on her swollen belly as she watched Elizabeth help Sarah with her letters at the outdoor table Warren had built. 5 years had passed since that day at the crossroads. 5 years of choosing, building, growing. The ranch had prospered beyond their wildest dreams, but it was the smaller victories that made Maybelle's heart sing. "Mama Belle," a small voice called out, and 3-year-old Matthew came running through the garden gate. His dark hair, so like his father's, wild from play. "Papa says come quick, something's happening." Maybelle scooped up her son, marveling as always at this life they'd created. "What's happening, little man?" "Dunno, but Papa's smiling big." She found Warren in the front parlor with unexpected guests, Reverend Mills and Judge Carter, both looking official but pleased. "Ah, Mrs. Dittmer," the judge said, rising. "Perfect timing. We have a proposition for you both." The town council met last night. Reverend Mills explained. With all the growth in the county, we need a new school, a proper one, with multiple teachers and real facilities. That's wonderful, Maybelle said, settling Matthew on her lap. But what does it have to do with us? Judge Carter cleared his throat. We'd like you to head the school board, Mrs. Dittmer. Your work with your sisters, teaching the ranch hands to read, organizing the library drive, you've proven yourself more than capable. Maybelle's breath caught. But I'm not educated. I never finished school myself. You've educated yourself, Warren said quietly. All those books, all that learning, you know more than most folks with fancy degrees. The board agrees, the judge added. Moreover, we want someone who understands what it's like to fight for education, to know its value because it was hard-won. Would I have real authority? Maybelle asked. To make decisions about curriculum, hiring teachers, accepting students. Complete authority, within reason, Reverend Mills assured her, though we suspect your reason exceeds most. Maybelle thought of all the children like her sisters, like herself, who deserved better than what circumstances had given them. Then yes, I'll do it. That evening, as they celebrated with a family dinner, Elizabeth, now 19, and engaged to Tom's nephew James, raised her glass. To Maybelle, she said, tears in her eyes, who saved us all and keeps on saving others. To choices, Maybelle corrected gently, and to the people brave enough to make them. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the children tucked into bed, Warren found Maybelle on the porch, reading through the stack of papers the judge had left. Already planning? He asked, settling beside her on the swing. There's so much to do. We'll need teachers who understand that not all children learn the same way. And books, so many books, and supplies for the children whose families can't afford them. You'll make it happen. Warren's confidence was absolute. You always do. We'll make it happen, she corrected, leaning into his warmth. Warren, do you ever think about how different things could have been? Sometimes, but not with regret. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Every choice led us here, even the painful ones. Even the painful ones, she agreed. A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Warren tensed. Old instincts still sharp, but relaxed when he recognized Doc Stevens's buggy. Bit late for a social call, he murmured. Doc pulled up in a cloud of dust, his face grave. Warren, Maybelle, I'm sorry to disturb your evening, but I've just come from the Widow Harrison's place. She's asking for you both. The Widow Harrison was Dry Creek's oldest resident, a woman who'd outlived 3 husbands and countless hardships. If she was asking for them, it was serious. They found her propped up in bed, frail but alert, her eyes still sharp at 90 years. Ah, the Dittmers, she wheezed. Good. Got something to say before I meet my maker. Don't talk like that, Maybelle said, taking her hand. You'll outlive us all. Pretty lies don't suit you, girl. But the widow smiled. I asked you here because I've been watching how you took a marriage born of desperation and grew it into something beautiful. How you turned that ranch from a monument to loneliness into a real home. She gestured to a wooden box on the dresser. Open it. Inside were papers, deeds, and more money than Maybelle had ever seen in one place. I've no children, the widow continued. No family at all. But I've got land, 3,000 acres north of your spread, and the money to develop it. I'm leaving it to you both. We can't accept this, Warren protested. You can and you will. Her grip on Maybelle's hand tightened. But there's a condition. The land's to be used for those who need a second chance, women escaping bad situations, children with nowhere else to go, families starting over. Maybelle's eyes filled with tears. A place where people can choose their own paths. Exactly. The widow's eyes sparkled. Call it Crossroads Ranch. Seems fitting, don't you think? She passed peacefully 3 days later, having seen her legacy secured. The funeral was the largest Dry Creek had ever seen, people coming from miles away to pay respects to a woman who'd helped so many over the years. As they stood by the grave, Warren whispered, "She chose us for this. Just like we chose each other," Maybelle replied, "Choice all the way down." The work of establishing Crossroads Ranch began immediately. Within 6 months, they'd built dormitories, a schoolhouse, and workshops where residents could learn trades. The first family arrived on a cold November morning, a young widow with 3 children, fleeing debts that would have seen them on the streets. "Welcome," Maybelle said, showing them to their cottage. "Stay as long as you need. The only requirement is that when you're ready to leave, you help someone else the way you've been helped." "Like a chain?" the woman said wonderingly. "A chain of choices and chances." Exactly like that. As winter gave way to spring again, Maybelle stood once more in her garden, now expanded to feed both their family and the growing community at Crossroads. Matthew played with his baby sister, Grace, while Elizabeth and Sarah helped the new teacher organize lessons. "You've built something remarkable," Warren said, joining her. "From that angry girl who stabbed a knife into the church pulpit to this, it's miraculous." "We built it," Maybelle corrected. "And it's not miraculous. It's what happens when people are given the freedom to become who they're meant to be." Speaking of which, Warren pulled out an envelope. "This came for you today. From Austin." Maybelle opened it with trembling hands, then gasped. "They want me to speak to the state legislature about education reform and women's rights." "Will you go?" She thought of that girl she'd been, voiceless and trapped. Then she looked at all they'd built, the ranch, the school, the sanctuary for those who needed it most. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'll go. And I'll tell them that the future of Texas isn't in controlling people, but in setting them free to choose their own destinies." "That's my wife," Warren said with pride. "Still fighting, still choosing." "Always," she agreed, pulling him close. "After all, isn't that what love is, choosing each other, again and again, every single day?" As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the sounds of life filled the air, children laughing, families gathering for supper, hope taking root in soil once watered by tears. The Dittmer Ranch had become more than just a home. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people were given the power to choose. And at its heart stood 2 people who'd learned that the greatest prison was the one you built for yourself, and the greatest freedom was the one you claimed with both hands. Maybelle looked out over all they'd built and smiled. That frightened, angry girl who'd been forced into marriage was gone, transformed into a woman who chose her battles and won them. And the man who'd once confused possession with love had learned that true partnership meant setting each other free. "Hey, Warren," she called as he headed inside to help with dinner. "Yes. Thank you for the Crossroads, for the choice, for everything." He came back, taking her hands in his. "Thank you for choosing to come back, for choosing us." They stood together in the garden as stars began to appear overhead. 2 souls who'd found freedom in each other's arms. Behind them, their home glowed with warmth and welcome. Before them, the future stretched out like an open road, full of infinite possibilities. And at the crossroads of their hearts, love bloomed eternal, not because it had to, but because they chose it. Every day, forever. "Inside the house," Matthew's voice piped up. "Mama, Papa, story time." Maybelle laughed. "Coming, little man. And do we have a story for you? About a girl who wasn't a horse to be traded, and a man who learned that love means setting someone free." Warren squeezed her hand. "Our story. Our story," she agreed. "The one we're still writing." And together, they walked into their home, into their future, into the life they'd chosen to build. Behind them, the crossroads stood empty in the moonlight, waiting for the next soul who needed to choose their path. But that's another story, for another time. This one ends as it began, with choice, with love, and with the knowledge that sometimes the very best things in life come from the freedom to say no, and the courage to say yes. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope it touched your heart as much as it did mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about Maybelle and Warren's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of choice, courage, and unexpected love, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories that capture the spirit of the American frontier. Don't forget to hit the like button and press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who appreciate authentic Western romance. Until next time, keep choosing your own path. Partners.